Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is Lorgar's discovery, Lorgar's Betrayal in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Index Asteroots, Blood Angels. Origins. When, through the Chaos God's interference, the pods of the 20 Primarches were stolen away from the laboratories of Luna and scattered across the galaxy, the pod marked 9 landed on the poisoned moon Baal Secundus. Once Baal Secundus and its sister moon Baal Primus were a prosperous world of grasses, seas, and great cities, but at the close of the dark age of technology, great wars ruined and poisoned its terrain. Many of Baal Secundus's people were mutated by the radiations and worse things that the wars left behind, others remained physically unchanged, but were reduced to nomads with scavenged technology. Despite the hostile conditions, the two sets of tribes found time for art, as well as time for war, with eternal hostilities of one against the other, though there was also no shortage of wars between pure humans or between mutants. The infant Primarch, with his then tiny angelic wings, was found by a tribe known as the Folk of Pure Blood, one of the non-mutated tribes. Despite his visible mutation, they took him in and began to raise him as his own, giving him the name of Sanguinius. Yet scarce weeks after that, the Folk of Pure Blood suffered a raid by the mutants known as the Sludgards. Sanguinius was already the size of a 3-year-old child, and as strong as an adult human, yet that was not yet enough. The Sludgards were forced back, but they took prisoners in their raid, Sanguinius among them, to eat most of them, as per custom. Seeing Sanguinius's inhuman strength and his wings as a sign of mutation, though, they thereafter raised him as their own. Sanguinius thus grew among the Sludgards, but never forgot his first guardians. Ultimately, he saw, life was much the same for both, and while both at times committed atrocities, neither set justified the other. By the time he was 1 year old, Sanguinius looked like an adult, and it was then that the trucks of the Sludgards encountered those of the Folk of Pure Blood once again. The stage was set for a new battle, one that could have destroyed both tribes, until Sanguinius shouted for parley. It is unlikely that anything less than a Primarch's charisma could have made peace between the two groups, yet Sanguinius, soaring in the scorching noonday sun, managed just that. The tribe's chiefs drank wine together, and with an exchange of hostages and goods they settled past feuds. And with that, Sanguinius gained his purpose. Over the next decades, he would travel Baal Secundus, making peace between the mutant and the pure human tribes. He studied the ruins in his own implanted memories, extracting technologies that, despite not being sufficient to cleanse the polluted surface of Baal Secundus, could filter its polluted waters and soils enough to allow sedentary and sustainable life once more. But he also united the tribes into a loose confederation, aiming above all to ensure that the war that devastated Baal Secundus the first time would not repeat itself. Sanguinius was not elected its unofficial leader due to his own ambition, but rather because both sides recognized that he was the only one who could do the job. After all, both sides saw him as their own. Those tribes that maintained refusal to join, Sanguinius left alone, but made clear that raids against the Confederation would not be tolerated. Sanguinius floated in the meditation chamber. The sandy wind from below, purified wind, the best that the rebuilt engines of Baal Secundus could manage, rushed upward, pumped like a great fan. An undecorated fan. It would have been a waste to decorate it, here in a sanctum no other would ever see. His thoughts were not on the arches around him, though. They were directed forward. He had told no one of this talent. It was not that they would reject him for it, of course. Both mutants and pure bloods distrusted foresight, but by now they would only worship him all the more for it. And therein lay the problem. Sanguinius did not particularly wish to be worshipped, and he certainly did not wish to be worshipped for a gift he knew to be imprecise. His foresight, accessible in moments of stillness like this one, it showed the most likely paths that the future would take, but not what choices led to them. It had been a great aid in anticipating and averting betrayals and raids, in showing the possible ways for Baal to recover, but it would not do the work that was necessary for such things. Only men could. And today, as he soared in the artificial updraft, he knew that only he could. He saw a future where the civilization he had built bloomed, connecting to the stars once more, but also one where the men of those stars rained death upon his people. He held the fate of Baal in his hands, and it weighed heavily indeed on his soul. But he would bear that weight, and soar despite it. Baal Secundus was recovering, not as far as Chemos, perhaps, but enough that it could construct such things as crude space probes. And the very first of those detected a titanic incoming vessel. The Imperium of Man had come to the Baal system. The Great Crusade. It is unknown why the Emperor did not come to meet Sanguinius personally, as he did for most of his other sons. It is possible that he foresaw the entirety of the events surrounding Baal's entrance into the Imperium. It is equally possible that he was simply distracted by the war against the Panamareks that he was waging the other side of the Imperium, and that Lord Commander Teanica Duval of the Imperial Army acted of his own accord. Teanica, a noted advocate of human genetic purity even by the Imperium's standards, followed the beacon of the space probe to Baal system, and demanded the planet to surrender. But upon the realization that half the population consisted of mutants, he demanded their complete extermination. Likewise, he saw Sanguinius as merely a powerful mutant rather than a primarch, and refused to negotiate with him. Teanica allied with some of the renegade pure-blooded tribes and for a full Terran year, up to the Emperor's arrival, waged a war of extermination. With a massive advantage in manpower and technology, he achieved a number of early victories, but Sanguinius led a guerrilla effort that shattered the 99th Expeditionary Fleet's operations. Said fleet responded with maximally destructive weaponry. When the Emperor found Baal, at the year's conclusion, the 99th Expeditionary Fleet and life on Baal Secundus were both all but extinct. Yet Sanguinius still lived, and somehow the Emperor convinced Sanguinius to join the Imperium. In great part, without a doubt, this was due to his own regret, feigned or otherwise, for Baal Secundus's tragic fate. It was also because the Emperor brought the 9th Legion, and Sanguinius could not help but accept them as his sons. But above all, it was because the Emperor spoke of his dream, a united, peaceful, utopian Imperium, and Sanguinius believed that no one else had as good a chance of achieving it. And thus, reluctantly, Sanguinius joined the Great Crusade, at the head of a legion whose leaders insisted on being renamed the Blood Angels in his honor. The 9th had been known for brutal assault fighting, yet Legion and Primarch gelled far better than might have been expected. Expanded after Sanguinius's arrival, the Blood Angels nevertheless remained a small legion, 75,000 by Crusade's end. Sanguinius did not want any compliances similar to Baal. Whenever possible, he found diplomatic solutions. When dealing with the Grid Kings of Solazan, for example, an empire spanning dozens of worlds that had beaten back 2 expeditionary fleets, he achieved such a solution by defeating their leader in ritual cyber combat, and then arranging a highly complex treaty ensuring their integration into the Imperium. This applied to Xenos as well. When faced with the migrating probators of the Allerlean cluster, Sanguinius had his legion launch a probing attack and arranged for the probators to afterward retreat to the galactic fringe, despite a lack of a mutually comprehensible language. The Blood Angels retained their capacity for devastating assaults, though. Those Xenos species that were truly impossible to negotiate with, they accepted the need to exterminate, and Sanguinius saw battle at rates comparable to his brothers, despite what he might have wished. More often, when necessary, the Blood Angels would launch a brutal attack at the crucial points of an enemy's defense, but follow it with negotiation with the now broken foe. The Blood Angels became known as diplomats as well as soldiers, and artists. Sanguinius encouraged art in his legion as, above all, a means to connect with the humanity they flew above. Indeed, the Blood Angels generally did their best to interact with the population of both newly conquered and securely imperial worlds, to listen to their beliefs and dreams in the course of forming their own. This, too, was the case on Baal. The Bright Herald, as Sanguinius became known, did not rebuild Baal Secundus, but rather ordered the terraforming of the world of Baal itself, with the survivors of Baal Secundus, all pure-bloods, immigrants, and Legion staff living in orbital habitats for a time before the work was completed. Baal necessarily remained a cold desert for the most part, but one with great lakes and small seas, with towering forests beyond the cliffs of their shores. And, of course, Sanguinius tried also to connect with his brother Primarches. A number of them became close friends. Ferrus Manus, for instance, Sanguinius built a bond with due to their similar tactics. Horus and Angron, with Sanguinius, formed the so-called Triquetrum. Each of the three was among the most powerful of the Primarches in hand-to-hand combat, as a number of implacable foes, notably the Orcs of Goro, learned to their detriment. Yet the three Primarchs was truly unified by their compassion and their uncertainty about the course of the Imperium. The Primarch sees that the word-bearers might turn against the Imperium, but then, he sees the same for us. The future, as he emphasizes, is fluid and subject to interpretation. Personally, I firmly agree. Psychic powers, even those of the Bright Herald, should not be trusted fully, even if many in the Legion will dissent on that point. Nonetheless, the word-bearers are not the most popular of legions, among the Asteroutes. So why, then, is the 17th counted among the legions closest to us? They are courteous and no more blood-soaked than necessary, true, yet they also appear unable to understand the point of the imperial truth. The answer, I think, is because appearances can deceive. Humanity needs, not gods, not exactly, but angels. Ideals to believe in. The imperial truth aims to provide those ideals, but from talking to civilians, for many of them they are exemplified by a human face, the iterators, for instance. Or the Asteroutes. And we know how that might end. To prevent anything similar, Lorgar ascribes an inhuman face to the truth, that of the Emperor, distant as he is. Because for humanity to be united, and at peace, we must have at most one God. I believe we will have zero in time, of course. That is the aim of unity, no gods, only us. The distinction between men and angels will become a momentary one, for the men of tomorrow would be angels today. And I think that Lorgar believes that as well, as an end goal. Most of all, I desperately hope that it is a possible goal, that we are not working on a fool's errand. And that hope is one so fundamental to who we are that it might as well be faith. From the classified writings of High Warden Dagobert. The reason for this uncertainty was exemplified by some of the other Primarchs. Alpharius's vision for the future, for instance, was one of eternal strife. Conrad Kurz was worse. Near the end of the crusade, he and Sanguinius met in a great debate over the course of the crusade, where Kurz promoted a ruthless tyranny that was always a hair trigger away from unleashing maximum force. The debate ended with both Primarchs more distrustful of each other than ever before, and, crucially, neither the Emperor nor any of his close associates commented on who was right. Thus, increasingly, Sanguinius saw that the Emperor's dream was a vague thing, that his father had told each of the Primarchs whatever they had wanted to hear, his true aspirations remaining inscrutable. The Bright Herald could sense lies well, and he believed the Emperor had told the truth to him, but perhaps not exclusively the truth, and surely not the whole truth. This distrust was magnified, because Sanguinius was keeping secrets of his own, ones shared with only his inner circle of perhaps 12 Asteroutes. Prime among these was the flaw of the Blood Angel's gene seed, a weakness that arose rarely, but that caused the afflicted to degenerate into mindless berserkers. Sanguinius searched for a cure, but in vain. Over the last years of the Great Crusade, the flaw became somewhat more common, and Sanguinius began to deploy the Legion more selectively for fear of the damage those afflicted by the flaw might do, including that secret's revelation. This did not endear Sanguinius to the War Masters. It is perhaps for this reason that Sanguinius distrusted Fulgrim so. The Phoenician seemed the perfect son, but his fanaticism in prosecuting the Great Crusade was not matched by sufficient reflection on what that crusade truly meant, a perspective uncomfortably like that of Lord Commander Teanica, such was the public line. Yet while the two Primarchs were in some ways similar, privately Sanguinius admitted that he knew his own flaws, and suspected that Fulgrim had equal flaws of his own, ones yet unrevealed, perhaps unopened, but that would suffice to ruin the Imperium. And then, rumors of a cure in the Sinus cluster, and Sanguinius rallied the Legion to him, even as the Imperium descended into the civil war its cruelty inevitably foretold. The Great Betrayal. The Sinus cluster, conquered by the Imperium several decades before, rose in open rebellion approximately 2 years before the betrayal, when, months later, this fact became evident, the Blood Angels chose to take on the region's pacification. This was brought on by the belief that the Sinus cluster held the key to curing the flaw, a belief that was in a sense true, but a sense far darker than the one Sanguinius had imagined. In it, the Blood Angels would fight the Legion's only true battle of the betrayal, and come to understand the dark reasons for the Imperium's compromised foundation. To keep the mission's true motivation secret, Sanguinius began it by using mysterious means to weed out those in the Legion whose loyalty was not absolute, ordering them without comment to protect Baal and the Imperium while the bulk of the legion fought on Sinus. To his surprise, this scan revealed a fair number of Alpharius's spies among the legion's attendants. Sanguinius exposed and humiliated them before sending them back to Triton, for he knew that Alpharius's motivations and his own would yet become opposed. Strange occurrences began as soon as the 9th Legion's fleet entered the Sinus cluster. The stars of the sky around the jump point were simply wrong, far too many red stars compared to records, and indeed far too many stars in general. Moreover, the 7 planets and 15 moons of the cluster, and this took some time for the fleet's personnel to understand, for it made so little sense, had been stretched into great sheets that fluttered around the cluster's rearranged stars, as if detached wings around a human body. Finally, every member of the fleet, but especially the non-Astartes among them, began experiencing a severe psychic pressure. The Blood Angels launched several automated probes, all non-conclusive. The configuration of the altered worlds made it impossible for the flagship Red Tier to safely approach them, so Sanguinius left tactical command of the Void Battle to First Captain Raldaron and, alongside several companies and the Sanguinary Guard, landed on the leaf that had been Sinus Prime. It was after this landing that the Blood Angels' fleet was attacked by a demonic host, one composed of winged furies that soared in the void as if it was the sky. Raldaron responded quickly, using the implausible terrain to take apart the demonic flocks without significant losses, but the assault served its role. Sanguinius was cut off from the Red Tier. Only a small squadron, led by 5th Captain Nasser Umit, managed to fight through and get news of what was happening to the Primarch. The Bright Herald, meanwhile, was warily welcomed by the now mutated people of Sinus Prime. They spoke of a peaceful secession from the Imperium in the name of chaos, and looking on them, Sanguinius saw that they were indeed happier than they ever were under Imperial rule, as well as stronger, tougher, and more hopeful. All of this, he was informed, allowed by sorcery whose scale even Magnus would be shocked by. Sanguinius, Aes-Calon, and the Sanguinary Guard were brought to the palace of the Daemon Kiris, one of the world's 4 rulers, who tempted Sanguinius by speaking of the Chaos Gods, but the Bright Herald refused to commit himself. And then a commotion, as Umit's 5th company entered with blades unsheathed and bolters loaded, and Sanguinius heard of the attack on his fleet. Kiris justified it as a rival faction, but with Umit's frankness the illusion that the daemon had woven unraveled before Sanguinius's eyes, and what had seemed to be a bright hall was revealed to be a charnel cathedral, corpses with ecstatic and agonized expressions scattered across the floor. Thus the negotiations ended, and the Battle of Sinus began. Sanguinius's strike team suffered severe losses against the demonic hordes and the now hostile people of Sinus, but escaped the encirclement through Captain Furio's sacrifice. Yet they remained stranded on Sinus Prime's surface, which now warped to prevent them from getting out, and so the battle continued, the Blood Angels having achieved only a better defensive position. The Blood Angels were reluctant to bring destruction on those they did not understand, but they knew that they had no choice. After beating back 7 lesser assaults, the Blood Angels were attacked by one of the 4 demonic lords of Sinus, the bloodthirster Kabandha. Sanguinius himself dueled the daemon, and barely defeated it, yet he was near death afterward, and that moment allowed 2 of the remaining lords of Sinus, Scabiathrax and Tarkax, to seize control of the flaw. The Blood Angels' minds were crushed as never before. Even as Raldaron achieved final victory in the skies of Sinus, nearly every Blood Angel of the fleet collapsed like a puppet with strings cut. Fortunately, the human crew were able to maintain holding position. Those on the ground fared worse, driven into a berserker rage, only now with more than full awareness of what they were doing, tears dripping from their eyes as they rampaged across Sinus in meaningless and suicidal slaughter. This attack knocked Blood Angels unconscious throughout the galaxy, yet most of that galaxy paid it little heed. For the remnants of the Legion, without word from Sinus or their Primarch, refused to take a side in the civil war of the Great Betrayal, and instead retreated to Baal, refusing to believe that Sanguinius was lost. The only Blood Angels not affected by the attack were those librarians able to use their powers to circumvent the flaw, and one of them, Mkanikano, saved the Legion by allowing his friend Apothecary Miros to overcome the altered flaw, and to restore Sanguinius to consciousness, wresting the flaw back to quiescence. The awakened Raldaron sent down half the Legion under Captain Dar Nakir as reinforcements, and the battle was once more even. Yet as the surviving members of the strike team gathered back together, seeing what they had done, ruin even chaos would be hard-pressed to match, One final parley took place. Kiris, Scabiathrax, and Tarkax came before Sanguinius and parted, for an instant, the veil around Sinus, revealing the events occurring in the outside galaxy. It was not enough to see the details, but sufficient to understand that the galaxy was at war, a profoundly terrible war that had the Imperium on its knees, chaos among the forces now proving the Emperor's dream as hubristic greed. Yet, the three daemon lords, and the gods they represented, offered Sanguinius the chance to intervene in all of this. For with chaos and the Emperor both reeling, he could use its power to fix both worlds. It was not easy, for no enterprise of this scale could be, but the gods would cure the flaw as a token of what they could in time promise. Azkaelin stood at his Primarchus' side, the remaining sanguinary guard arranged in a ring around the bright herald, as the daemons made their speeches. They were silent. How could they not be? In the moment when their Primarch needed them most, the only moment when their nearly ceremonial function was profoundly necessary, they had failed. They had succumbed to the darkness within their souls, and instead of protecting their Primarch killed civilians who, in truth, were as much victims of all of this as anything. But even deep in his regret, Azkaelin listened to the monster's offer. Chaos was monstrous, but that could be changed. Sanguinius would have to be monstrous to accept its full power, but that would ultimately be for the best. The same temptation as ever. What right did the guard have, to decide whether Sanguinius should accept it? No, that was the wrong way to think about it. What right did they have, not to protect their Primarch from it? Azkaelin had failed in his duty once. He would not do so again. That's enough, he said, stepping in front of Sanguinius. Enough time wasted. There is a battle yet to come. Shut up while your superiors are talking. The feathered one, Azkaelin was hard-pressed to remember their unpronounceable names, spat. Lord Sanguinius, the goat-like one said, in a more kindly voice. Kiris, that name, Azkaelin knew well. Control your son. Azkaelin, the Primarch said, looking down at him. You believe this is an offer I should not waste my time listening to? I do, Azkaelin said, standing his ground. And Sanguinius's expression changed. It was the subtlest of shifts, one that perhaps none in the galaxy save Azkaelin would have recognized, but Azkaelin had led the Sanguinary Guard for many decades, and he knew his Primarch's moods. It was a change from diplomacy to war. And it seems it was, Sanguinius said, raising his spear. You offer me the power to improve the galaxy, but only as you promised the people of Sinus the power to improve their system. Power, aye, but at the cost of giving up purity of purpose. What the I that would be transformed by chaos will not be my current ideal, but a nightmare worse than this clusters. The daemons did not attack, not yet. These ones had some respect for proper protocol, at least. Chaos is only the wishes of the galaxy, Kiris said. What would affect you is the mix of every sapient being's inner urges. A mix, Sanguinius acknowledged, but a mix that is not any sapient being's true desire. That's enough, Kiris, we've failed, the third daemon, the rotten one, said with a sigh. Back to the first plan it is, and probably without the blood god. We almost, the feathered one insisted, having opened its beak to say more before Sanguinius interrupted it. But you didn't, the ninth Primarch said, and the warped light of the monstrous chamber seemed to run off him like water, revealing the golden soul beneath. His white wings seemed to glow too, so that Azkaelin could not see the injuries his lord had suffered against Kabandha. Because so long as one true blood angel lives, he will remember the distinction between his own blood and that of others. That is the distinction that the Emperor has rejected, but that I will not. Even to kill war itself. For if I break the skull throne, I refuse to raise worse things from its dust. Sanguinius tensed as he spoke, as did the monsters, as did the Sanguinary Guard. A moment before battle. But it was to Azkaelin that the bright herald turned. In the end, Azkaelin, I must disagree with your definition, from Melchior. A fallen angel is an angel still. And that is why we must never fall. Sanguinius' gaze turned to the enemy. For an instant, the three daemons seemed to shrink from him. If your gods offered me everything to fall, it is only because they fear what we may become if I rise. And when you meet them again, tell them they were right to fear Sanguinius so. And then, at last, there was only war. The offer was true, and yet Sanguinius refused it. The details of what happened in that clash remain unclear. Sanguinius banished Kyrus and Scabiathrax, driving Tarkax back, albeit all of his sanguinary guard fell in the confrontation. And after, Sanguinius, with a heavy heart, ordered an orbital bombardment before leaving behind his and the legion's crucible. The escape. As the 9th Legion's fleet departed the Sinus cluster, Sanguinius conferred with his inner circle once more. The Sinus campaign had amply demonstrated to him fully the error that the Emperor had made in his secrecy and his tyranny, which had led to the demmed rebellion of Sinus and to many other worlds. And for this reason, he made the decision that he would no longer keep secrets from the Legion, except for those, such as the specifics of his psychic abilities, that demanded operational secrecy. So he spoke to the Blood Angels of what had truly happened on Sinus, of his doubts in the Imperium, of his own psychic nature, and of the flaw. Yet on that last detail, his speech was far less pessimistic than could have been expected. For when the allied daemons had seized control of the flaw, they had also revealed to Sanguinius its psychic nature. And what could be controlled by the Legion's enemies could also be controlled by the Legion itself. In time, study by the Legion's librarians would reveal a solution, which allowed Sanguinius to take control of the flaw when it came over a Blood Angel, freeing them from their effects, albeit the action of taking on his son's burdens onto himself was not without effect on Sanguinius. All that, though, would come in later months. For now, the Blood Angels merely looked outwards, and saw a galaxy aflame. Not wishing to commit the Legion to a course of action without an unbiased understanding of the circumstances, Sanguinius directed the Great Fleet to the place where the rebellion by all accounts began, the Istvan system. There, he found a graveyard. It took several weeks, but gradually the Blood Angels understood that Lorgar had been tempted by chaos, and had led half the other legions into war as a pawn of those powers of malice. But before Sanguinius could make a further decision, the Night Lords arrived. Despite being outnumbered, Kurs demanded the Blood Angels immediately surrender, under the presumption that their absence implied complicity in Lorgar's rebellion. Sanguinius, seeking to avoid a confrontation, ordered a retreat to Bale while maintaining his innocence. Kurs gave the order to launch boarding torpedoes. Sanguinius met his brother on the lower decks of the Red Tier, and the two spoke, in a place where none other could hear, of the future. "No, Conrad, I will not kneel. And I will work to restore the Imperium, but, not as it was before. It must become something worth saving. Yes, but we are all angels, all, 15 of us. We were all meant to be exemplars, and we all succeeded in that. Did you ever think about what sort of monsters you inspired? Your foresight is not an excuse. Don't you understand? I know how difficult and unlikely the utopian dream always was, as well as anyone. That's why it was called a dream. But that doesn't mean we can stop trying, not yet. There is still time. You can still change, bruh. Sanguinius to Kurs, in the last seconds before the Primarch's duel. Upon hearing Sanguinius out, the Night Haunter slashed at his brother's neck with his lightning claws, a blow that Sanguinius parried with ease, for the Bright Herald had expected this outcome. What the two Primarches had failed to resolve in ink, they would now resolve in blood. Both fought with stellar fury, as around them their sons, but Sanguinius proved the stronger. But with Kurs gravely wounded and at his mercy, he hesitated, unsure if he wished to kill his brother. That moment was one Kurs used to make good his escape, and return to his fleet. There was no further battle, the Blood Angels disengaged again, catching up with the vanguard of the fleet, and returned to Bale. This time, the Night Lords let them go. On Bale, Sanguinius gathered the entire legion. There, despite Horus's astropathic pleas, he made clear the path that the Blood Angels were already walking. The Imperium had most likely been built on lies and tyranny from the beginning, and with the Emperor comatose there would be no chance of redeeming it in the future, not with the likes of Alpharius, Kurs, and Malkador at its helm. The Blood Angels would no longer fight for the lesser evil of the Imperium. Sanguinius was the Bright Herald no more. Now he was Sanguinius Malaklakar, the last angel of a galaxy of darkness. The Long War. The Blood Angels departed Bale, along with habitats repurposed to support the vast majority of its population that joined their exodus. Those that did not, Human and Astarte, led by Captain Gallon of the 16th Company, would rejoin the Imperium elsewhere, the Astaroutes ultimately reinforcing the Luna Wolves, while Baal itself would be rebuilt from the ground up. Since the betrayal, the Blood Angels have for the most part been protectors of human and human-compatible civilization on the galactic fringe. They are peacekeepers and diplomats, but they are by design also warriors. While they have bound themselves not to wage offensive campaigns against the Imperium, and remain on not entirely hostile terms with said Imperium because of that, despite an official classification of war, they have defended independent and effectively independent worlds, human and Xeno, from the Imperium on numerous occasions. Yet it has historically not been the Imperium that has been their main foe, for its reach is not infinite and there is no shortage of foes on the rim. The most famous and infamous such conflict was the War of the Beast in M32. An overextended Imperium ran headlong into the greatest Wa'ak seen since Olaner, with the crook beast cutting their supply lines to shreds with uncanny cunning for an orc. Yet while the Imperium retreated, worlds burned, and Sanguinius stepped in. By then he had distanced himself from much of the Legion, for with every Astarte he freed from the flaw the pressure on his mind worsened, causing erratic mood swings. Even as the ancient Raldoron led an assembled Legion fleet once more in the Udina system, Sanguinius confronted the beast in a battle of titans. In the end, the battle destroyed both. But neither combatant's body has ever been found, and the Blood Angels believe Sanguinius still lives, taking as evidence the regular appearance of Malaklakar's apparent psychic image, known as the Sanguiner. In any case, the flaw has not returned. The Emperor's children would wipe out the beast's lieutenants, but though the Imperium prefers to forget, it forever owes a great debt to the Blood Angels for the Battle of Udina. There have been other great campaigns over the millennia. In early M33, the Black Star sector, containing many worlds under Blood Angel protection, was covered by a warp storm that, upon abatement, revealed a land tyrannized by the Word-Bearers alongside elements from other Chaos Legions. The Imperium would likely have responded with exterminati, but in the decade-long campaigns of the Black Star Liberation, the 9th Legion freed the region once more, albeit at the cost of the mortal life of Raldoron, the effective Legion Master, who had to be entombed in a dreadnought after severe damage to his flagship. The campaigns against a potential Orc resurgence in the first half of M35, culminating in a victory by Leonid Castavaris and his Demi-Urg allies over Wa'ak Stars Masha, and the containment of the Vorsh raids of the Dark Eldar, early M40, also bear high places in the records of Blood Angel victories, though their defeats, such as the disaster against a demonic tide on Hell's Hollow, in 266.M37, are remembered as well. But over time, the Imperium has recovered from the devastation of the Betrayal and the War of the Beast, its frontiers extending toward the galactic edges once again. Its march was glacial, but inexorable. And so more and more often, it was the Imperium that the Blood Angels were forced to defend themselves and their allies against. And so they responded. In 700.M41, the Pact of Tau was signed by leaders of 10 polities, among them Servandante, equerry to Sanguinius, before rapidly growing to encompass thousands of human and Xeno civilizations into an association of mutual trade and defense, a pact symbolized and held together by the Blood Angels. The Imperium has tested the Pact of Tau more and more over time, most recently in the campaigns of the Damocles Gulf. The Imperium has a great advantage against the Pact in numbers, unity, and overall industrial might. But the Pact has its own advantages, and not only technological, for diversity has a power of its own, and so do the founding ideals of holding to peace and openness whenever possible. The Blood Angels hope that a full-scale war against the Imperium can be avoided. And, what is more, they believe that if it is, and if the growing Orc, Tyrannid, and Chaos threats do not come to destroy them both, then it is the Pact of Tau that would win an ideological debate. Because it is precisely the frequency of death that means that, wherever life has a foothold, it is worthy of protection. Because the souls of sapients, when not corrupted by forces beyond reality, and sometimes even when they are, strive on the whole to both rise themselves and raise others. And because the shadows that made the Imperium seem necessary cannot, by their very nature, remain forever. Organization. The Blood Angels' organization has historically been loose, but with the Pact of Tau has come a general reassertion of hierarchy. They are formally led by Sanguinius, as expressed by the visits of the Sanguiner, but in practice it is the 10 members of the High Council that steer the Legion. These are the equerry to Sanguinius, who chairs the council, and also traditionally leads the Archangel's company, commanders of the 4 specialist organizations, a representative from the human and Xeno support staff of the Legion, which are far smaller in number than in most legions, as the Blood Angels do not have dedicated auxiliary forces, instead fighting alongside various allies of moment, 3 additional counselors, as chosen by the Sanguiner, usually from among the legions captains, and 1 spot reserved for the dreadnought Ralderon. It is rare, but not unheard of, for these tend to actually gather in one place. The rest of the Legion mainly consists of, currently, 51 companies led by captains, which average slightly over 3,000 asteroids each, but vary wildly in size, as the unit of organization directly below the High Council. Captains have a great deal of independence, but at least in principle acknowledge the authority of the High Council, though this is not always the only authority they recognize. Typically, companies are subdivided into wings led by commanders, which are themselves subdivided into feathers led by lieutenants, and finally squads under sergeants, though many companies have different names for any or all of these. Each company recruits independently, but young recruits very often move between the companies. The most infamous company is the Death Storm, currently led by one Gabriel Seth, which does not recruit for itself but takes in the most martially oriented initiates of other companies. Its members believe that the most useful application of asteroids is in war, and so they leave aside all else and throw themselves into non-stop fighting to a level even Imperial and Final Shore asteroids very rarely match. Some whisper that the Death Storm is the Flow reincarnated, though it predates the War of the Beast. 4 specialist orders exist. 2. The Liberius and the Technicum are organized very loosely, relying mainly on master-apprentice relations. Both often teach and learn from Xeno species, in the former's case including the Eldar, although while the Blood Angels have no qualms about working with the Eldar, experience have shown them that they are never reliable allies, and Sanguinius's relation with Angandrir cooled greatly after the betrayal, though the 2 remained in contact. The other 2, namely the Sanguinary Order and the Creed of Echoes, are a different matter altogether. Both have organization and ritual that is more or less religious. The Order's cult is derived from the rites of flesh and blood of the ancient inhabitants of Baal Secundus, of both lines, as well as incorporating a mystical approach to the work typically done by apothecaries. The Creed of Echoes incorporates elements of the cult Mechanicus and guesses at pre-collapse Baalite culture, as well as being strongly influenced by the most ancient Xeno species. Its practical role is in synthesizing the various cultures, histories, and beliefs of the Blood Angels and, especially, their allies into perspectives that can see each other well enough to cooperate. Combat Doctrine. While the Blood Angels emphasize that violence is to be avoided wherever possible, they are still asteroids. They have retained a preference for close combat, as well as for air combat, though their specific doctrine is highly adaptable due to their ever-changing roster of allies. As protectors of the Galactic Rim, they have grown used to fighting alongside almost anyone, and their technology reflects this, schizophrenic compared to the Imperiums, or more accurately Mechanicums, or the Eldars, albeit sane compared to Chaos. It reflects and tries, with varying degrees of success, to synthesize myriad influences. Thus, for instance, the Demiurge-based trace pattern dreadnoughts, while preventing degeneration, require long periods of sleep avoided by the Imperial Eternal pattern, but outdo them in defensive capability and, thanks to Loxital technology, also in fine motor control. The Blood Angels do not believe in offensive war, but they are far from ignorant of the need for offensive operations even in wars started by the enemy, and since the formation of the Pact of Tau, this includes Imperial worlds. Generally, they favor a very public decapitation strike in such circumstances, aiming for a rapid surrender. Operations to contain guerrillas are of lower priority, as planets dominated by resistance movements will not be kept past war's end anyhow. It is sufficient that the centers of power are transferred to Blood Angel control. In cases with pro-Blood Angel guerrilla movements active, subtler approaches are taken. More often, though, the Blood Angels are called on to protect allied planets, in recent times usually against Tyranid or Imperial forces. Typically they tend towards a mobile defense rather than guarding fortresses, seeking above all to not concede total air or orbital superiority, evacuating civilians where necessary, counter-attacking to maintain uncertainty in the enemy, and trying to encourage defectors and splinter the enemy's unity of command, though some companies do also retain expertise in siege warfare. Home world. Sanguinius's original home world was the moon Baal Secundus, a desert world whose civilization was in a post-apocalyptic state. Baal Secundus was devastated by the 99th Expeditionary Fleet, though many of its traditions live on in the Sanguinary Order. Upon joining the Imperium, Sanguinius ordered the terraforming of Baal itself. The planet was characterized by high gravity and a cool equilibrium temperature, but by the time of the Betrayal terraforming had proceeded to the point of it being solidly habitable, with large stretches covered by forest, taiga, deciduous woods, and temperate rainforest alike, as well as tundra and desert. The scarps, canyons, and 9 seas of Baal are etched into Blood Angel cultural memory, and the planet attracted many immigrants eager for a fresh start, lured by both the economic benefits of a legion's presence and Sanguinius's charisma, and bringing the full technological expertise of the Great Crusade. Nonetheless, Baal remained sparsely populated, on the whole, and only moderately organized, leading the Blood Angels to recruit predominantly from other worlds. Sanguinius ordered a retreat from Baal when the Legion left the Imperium, but most of the population joined the Exodus fleet. While Baal remained an imperial world until its destruction by the Red Corsairs, Malachlakar did not express a wish to return even briefly, and few of the Blood Angels themselves expressed particular interest in private pilgrimages, for the true essence of Baal was its people, and those remained with the Blood Angels in their flight. Since then the Blood Angels have been fleet-based, though some companies have built small fortress monasteries on specific worlds, and as of late the construction of a grand new area has begun on Tau. Beliefs. The core of the Blood Angels' disagreement with the Imperium's policy is in their rejection of unity as a principle. They do not believe that forcing a single government on the human people of the galaxy is desirable, and moreover oppose the general policy of extermination and subjugation of Xenos, with the partial exception of those, such as the Orcs and Tyranids, with which diplomacy is effectively impossible, but without excluding even monstrous species that can be reasoned with. To this is added a distaste for secrecy. There are only 2 ranks of security clearance among the Blood Angels: Astarte, Standard, and High Council, and a tolerance of various religions even within the Legion's ranks. Nonetheless, on the whole the Blood Angels retain much of the imperial truth, above all its fundamentally optimistic view of the future. While they look down on the Imperium for the compromises it has made, the fundamental reason that the war between the Imperium and the Pact of Tau has remained contained is that both sides still see each other as less their enemies than much of the galaxy, though that is more on the Imperium's side, for the Blood Angels also allot respect to the Eldar, if somewhat less of it, as well as maintaining relations with some of the Necron dynasties, 2 minor dynasties having even signed the pact. Above all, the Blood Angels despise chaos, and while generally willing to engage in realpolitik even when Orcs or Tyranids are involved, they refuse to deal with those affected by the great enemy's corruption. The use of blood is not merely tradition, though it is that too, a tribute to the lost tribes of Baal Secundus where Sanguinius first took wing, mutant and pure blood alike. For some of our brothers, those whose homophagia bears the enduring remnant of the flaw, it is also a necessity. And it serves as a symbol of our own humility, that though others may call us angels, we know that we have not fully left behind our darker history. Like any legion, we must remain acutely aware of our sins, lest they consume us in place of the reverse. But above all, it is memory. Through the rites of the Sanguinary Order the blood of Malachlakar still flows in the veins of his sons, in a manner more direct than the other legions. And since we are Astaroths, that has more than symbolic significance. To lie in the sarcophagus is to see, and more, to know the past. To know the path that has led the Blood Angels to where we are. For without that, we cannot know where that path might lead, let alone where it must. The essence is, we have long been a splintered legion, in hierarchy, and on occasion in dream, and even after the pact we remain such. What unites us is in a sense blood alone. But the blood of Astaroths runs thicker than any other, and the blood of Sanguinius thicker than any other Primarchus. Corbulo, High Priest of the Sanguinary Order. Gene Seed. The early Gene Seed of the 9th Legion was afflicted by a flaw that drove a number of Astaroths mad with anger. Sanguinius Malachlakar took the flaw unto himself in the aftermath of the betrayal, and since then it has not reappeared. Nonetheless, since the War of the Beast, time and attrition have led to frequent deterioration in Blood Angel Gene Seed, and it is impressive that the Sanguinary Order has kept it not only viable but strong. An additional factor aiding this is the gene seed's immense compatibility with recruits from all branches of humanity. The blood angel's gene seed does, however, often contain a non-functioning mucranoid in an ocidula that gives somewhat less protection than usual, as well as occasional homophagia defects. At the same time, the homophagia's actual function tends to provide more memories than in other legions, and the general longevity of blood angels has been greatly extended to the point of experiencing minimal physical deterioration over time. Battle cry. A number of common battle cries exist in the legion, often straightforward ones such as, "For Sanguinius," or "Angels still." The cry present in all the companies, though, is, "To battle, sons of Sanguinius. Rise. Rise." 999.m41. The mountains soared above them. The world's thick air, singing with the barely guarded power of the warp, was funneled down the valley. Multicolored scrub clung to the slopes, transitioning into lush grass lower down, whistling in the wind. It was almost a daemon world, Mephiston of the Blood Angels reflected. Without the constant efforts of the local Xenos, it would have become such a long time ago. One of them, Violet Furred, hovered nearby, writing something in her notebook with a telekinetically held pen. "That we have, a Blood Angel," Lemuroots, Mephiston recognized, a hero of the Excelsior Company marked as dead a century past, spoke to her. "Your princesses maintain this world as a whole from sinking into the immaterium, but some of the monsters that live there still seek to attack, besieging the weak point in reality. Sanguinius has held the breach for millennia, a beacon to them, and their doom. That's, both really impressive and terrible." "How many millennia, exactly?" 9,000 years, since the War of the Beast, when Sanguinius was gravely wounded and his concentration shattered. The greater galaxy is full of wonders and horrors both, and among the latter, the orcs. "Come," Asterath said, and Mephiston tore himself away from the conversation to follow the Guardian around a bend of the river, and towards a scene of apocalypse. The entire valley before them was orange with blasts and flames, a never-ending nuclear explosion. The deafening sound, unnaturally attenuated before, now screamed its full cacophonic tones in cutting waves, individual shrieks blurring into a pulsing beat. The thunder of death. And in the midst of it, red-armored figures, and the golden silhouette of Malaklakar himself, his spear twirling endlessly. Yet the shadows that it struck reformed all too quickly, every time. Lemuroots had told the truth, but not the entirety of it, at least not so far as Mephiston had heard. There really were daemons that flooded here from the warp, occasionally, which was in fact why this world had been chosen. Yet the bulk of the battle that Mephiston's Primarch now waged, Asterath had explained, was against his own phantoms. For, Sanguinius had cured the flaw, by taking it onto himself. And in due time, when he could no longer hold all its death, it had manifested as furious ghosts. Not daemons, but if left unconstrained for too long, they became such. Thus, this retreat to a distant world, and this eternal battle. Mephiston prepared his power, feeling lightning in his eyes, but before he could release it the dance stopped. The phantoms had been cleansed, for the moment. Soon they would reform, but now, in the stillness, it was time for Mephiston's induction. "Guardian Astrorath," Sanguinius said, stepping forward, and despite custom Mephiston had to fight very hard not to kneel in his Primarch's presence. Sanguinius was as the librarian had always imagined him, golden and towering and white-winged, his every motion speaking of grandeur and kindness as one. Yet his eyes held an exhaustion that was not there in the ancient Picts, and more than a few of his feathers were stained various shades of red. "Who do you bring to the Valley of Death?" "I bring Brother Callisterius of the Archangels," Asterath said. "From this day forth," Mephiston interrupted, "as per tradition, let my name be Mephiston, and my company be those that stand here with you, my lord." Sanguinius nodded, a regal gesture in itself. "Mephiston, will you stand by me?" "I will." "Is your loyalty to all the people of the galaxy?" "It is." "Can you face the burden of this eternal battle, so that the Legion need not?" "I can." "Have you heard the call, that you have come here?" "I have." "And what were the words of the call that summoned you?" Mephiston tasted blood on his tongue as he replied with the unforgettable order. "Exile's end, star's blood, all fades. For but a moment, till midnight, follow this dream. Your Primarch, the angel, calls you. Then kneel, Mephiston, my son, Sanguinius said. But he frowned as he did so, and once Mephiston had finished his oath of loyalty, nodded with grim resolve. Yet it seems you shall not fight in this valley for long, Sanguinius Malachlacar said when that oath-taking was done. My visions, and your words, they leave only one option. The day is near when I, and the phantoms of the flaw that gnaw at my steps, will return to the pact of Tau and the galaxy at large. For worse hells than this one shall come if we do not. Check the description for the links to the author.